It is so beyond that, and it is not even a technology. We call it a socio-economic system because it interacts with the world like nothing else does. With AI systems, it has an impact on the society. It collects data. It is trained on data, oftentimes without consent. It sometimes doesn't account into your privacy. And we have no idea about the intentions of those who are building those systems.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bukhara. Today's guest has a life story that feels straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, or perhaps more fittingly, a Lara Croft movie. She's as courageous as she is inspiring, and that's before we even get into her groundbreaking work at the intersection of education, pedagogy, and AI. Elena Sinel is an award-winning social entrepreneur and the visionary founder of Teens in AI, an internationally acclaimed initiative launched at the UN AI for Good Global Summit. Recognized for her expertise in AI literacy and AI ethics, Elena is dedicated to equipping the next generation with skills to address the complex global challenges that they face. Her leadership in embedding AI education into broader societal frameworks has fostered partnerships with companies and governments worldwide, promoting diverse perspectives in tech. Elena's work in AI draws upon her decade-long experience as a consultant in international development, where she focused on poverty reduction and sustainable livelihoods across regions like Central Asia, the Balkans, and Ethiopia. Partnering with organizations such as the British Council, UNDP, and the World Bank, she developed impactful community solutions. But what makes Elena's story so captivating is not just all of these great accomplishments. It's also the incredible journey that brought her here. Born in Bukhara, Uzbekistan, a city steeped in a rich history along the historic Silk Road, Elena's childhood was a blend of exploring ancient artifacts and reading voraciously in a fascinating multicultural setting. Her upbringing, shaped by the Soviet education system, emphasized discipline and rigor, but left little room for creativity and play, an absence that would later fuel her commitment to reimagining education. As a teenager, Elena gave museum tours to visiting dignitaries and foreign nationals, gleaning knowledge from their stories at a time when information flowed slowly and, as she discusses, sometimes dangerously in that part of the world. These experiences, paired with her natural curiosity and love of languages, set her on a path to global citizenship. Elena's journey spans several continents and cultures, from studying economics and English in Uzbekistan to living in Bangladesh and eventually the UK, where she escaped domestic violence, lived in a women's shelter with her young daughter, and rebuilt her life with remarkable resilience and purpose. Our conversation today dives into how these experiences informed her approach to education, using hackathons as a way to ignite curiosity, teaching ethics, and solving real-world problems while exploring and deeply questioning technologies like AI. Elena believes that education should be purposeful, creative, and deeply connecting to solving humanity's biggest challenges. She shares insights on the importance of understanding AI through an ethical framework, and how AI can both address and exacerbate inequalities. She also discusses the power of creating a sense of wonder in students, the need to connect learning to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and other topics. Elena's story is really one of courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in the transformative power of education. It's a reminder that even in the face of life's toughest challenges, there always remains the ability to create something meaningful, not just for ourselves, but most importantly, for others. Now, for my conversation with Elena Sinel. Hi, Elena. Welcome to the podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Hi, Jason. Thank you for having me. So I am just outside of London in a place called Kent. So it's not raining today, which is very unusual for London and outside of the London areas.
That's great. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your work?
Absolutely. So I am Elena Sinel. I'm the founder of Teens in AI, as in teenagers. And we founded Teens in AI in 2018 at the United Nations AI for Good Global Summit. And our mission is to inspire teenagers or students aged 12 to 18 from all over the world to use AI for impact, for social good.
Well, we're certainly going to jump into the work you're doing because I find it fascinating and timely and certainly useful for the entire audience to know about. But I believe you're my first interview of someone from the UK. So can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to grow up?
Well, actually, I'm not originally from the UK. So I am living here right now. I've been living since 2008, I think, is when we eventually arrived and settled. And then prior to this, I lived in Bangladesh. And then prior to this, I lived in Ethiopia. Prior to this, I lived in the Balkans, and before that in south of France. But I'm originally from Uzbekistan, Central Asia.
Okay, so you are certainly the most internationally traveled, let's say, or even internationally educated person. So can you tell me like where and when did you grow up as a child, and what was your schooling like?
So I grew up in a very small town called Bukhara, 300,000 people. So it's a pretty small in terms of the geographical location where I'm from. So Bukhara is a very ancient town, very old, 2,500 years old, on the Silk Road. So you might know some reference to Bukhara carpets, to the ancient history of Silk Road. So that's where I come from. And my childhood, I guess I was surrounded by a lot of history. So it was quite inevitable that I heard a lot of legends and stories about my hometown. My mom was a historian that helped as well. And a lot of my childhood was spent in museums. So one of the biggest museums in Bukhara is the fortress, which was the winter fortress of Amir. So my entire childhood, pretty much every weekend, I used to spend running around the yards, not realizing that some centuries ago or some many years ago, there was this Emir walking the streets of this massive fortress. It was almost like a town inside of a town. So that was me discovering.
That's wonderful and certainly unique. How do you remember playing as a child? It sounds like in very historic settings, but what was it like to play in those environments?
So it was pretty safe, I would say. We had a tall block of houses where we lived in, like one of those typical big Soviet blocks, like a square. And we lived on the third floor. My mom had great visibility of the playing yard, the playground. And so we used to do our homework, come back from school. My grandma would make sure we've done our homework. Mom and dad always worked until about 5 or 6 o'clock. So we were looked after by our grandparents. So it was my grandma who made sure we did the homework. We had our lunch because school finished a bit earlier than here in the UK. And that's it. And then we could be free to read, to play. So freedom as we knew it. But I think it's all not as easy these days because I think that playground is now populated with a car park and all sorts of other things that were built. So I don't really know where kids play in that place. But we used to have a very safe environment where a lot of kids just get together and we just run around, make things, build things. Yes.
Yeah, that's certainly a recurring theme with most of the folks that I've interviewed, no matter where they've grown up. When it comes to your learning, what was your first love?
I think it was English and ability to interact with all these foreigners that I kept bumping into in my during my wanderings in the museum, because there were a lot of them. Bukhara is a very popular little town, so we have a lot of foreigners from Australia, UK, New Zealand, Japan, China, all over the world. So everyone comes to visit, which is amazing. So it's a very touristic place. So you eventually bump into some foreigner wandering around the old town. So we lived in the new town, but because my mom worked in the old town, so we used to visit it very often. And in that museum, there were a lot of foreigners, and I just wanted to know how I could interact with them. So my love of learning, I think, was just out of curiosity and wanting to interact with people I've never met. So I started learning English when I was about 9. It was my first foreign language. Maybe not my first, actually. When I was in the kindergarten, I learned a little bit of Tajik, which is a variation of Persian. And I used to think, my sister and I used to think that it's the language only her and I can interact in. And we thought, nobody else can understand. My mom and dad can't understand us. So we used to speak Tajik in the kindergarten and Russian at home. So we're kind of a very mixed family with a lot of Ukrainian and Uzbek. So typically, nobody would even say or know that I'm from Uzbekistan because I have so many mixes. Both of my grandmas are from Ukraine and my granddads are Uzbeks. So at home, we used to speak Russian, still speak Russian. In the kindergarten, we spoke Tajik, which is a variation of Persian only spoken in Bukhara and Samarkand. And so English was my third discovered language, I suppose, but it very quickly became my most favorite one. And I guess from a very early age, my mom used to tell us, if you learn how to speak English, the world is your oyster. And obviously for a long time, I had no idea why she would say that. She would say things like, it will open so many doors. Let's learn English. So she was very determined that all three of us learned how to speak English. And out of all three, only I managed to learn how to speak English. My sister never really bothered. My brother never did either. So I kind of felt there was something in it for me, and I really loved it. For me, learning languages was something quite amazing. So I speak French, and I learned a little bit of Arabic when I lived in Ethiopia, just why not? But English was one of the first languages that I just fell in love with. And I always wanted to read Shakespeare in the authentic language in the same way as I wanted to reach Victor Hugo in the authentic language, the Notre Dame de Paris. So, yes, it was really lovely to be able to learn a language and finally be able to communicate and say hello and just start a conversation. Probably already knew a lot, but I would still ask the same questions and just in order to meet somebody new and practice my English. So that was it.
That's wonderful. And how many languages do you speak comfortably?
Comfortably, well, Russian, I suppose it's my native language, English, French, not as well as I used to, unfortunately, when I lived in France. So I lived in France for 2 years, and by the time I left, I was quite fluent. But these days, when I go to France, I have to think. I have to think. But in the past, I was able to watch the news in French and, and understand what's happening. And I was pregnant when I was in France. So you're almost forced to read a lot and to understand what's happening in your body and be able to communicate with the doctors, at every appointment and know what am I meant to do, how am I meant to prepare, because I was only 22 at that time. So, and I spoke Macedonian, took me a couple of months to get used to just a bit of differentiation I felt it was more of a dialect because it had a lot of similarities with Russian. It's a similar sort of roots of Slavic languages. So I could go to, probably to Macedonia, to Serbia. I could go to Ukraine, and I could probably pick up some of the words. And if you live there for long enough, I lived in Macedonia for 2 years, so I became quite comfortable. I even passed my driving test in Macedonian. Fun fact, just had to do it. And in Ethiopia, I guess Amharic was not a very widely spoken language internationally. It was just spoken in Ethiopia. So I thought, well, whilst I'm here, and I was busy working and studying, and Victoria was only 3, I think, 2.5, 3. So I thought, what else should I do? Learn a language. So I went and I took some course in the UN on Arabic. So I learned a bit of Arabic. I do not speak Arabic. I still remember how to write, and I remember the alphabet and how to spell my name and probably some very basic words, but I wouldn't be able to interact in Arabic anymore, unfortunately. It takes time and practice, and I always recommend to live in a place if you want to learn it properly.
Well, you've certainly rocketed to the top of my list of people I need to do international traveling with, or if I'm stuck traveling internationally, you're the one that I want you to guide me through those travels. Now, forgive me, I know next to nothing about schooling in Uzbekistan, but what was your formal schooling like, even as an elementary school or high school student?
A lot of memorization. So it's very similar to Soviet education. We were Soviet for a long time, I think under occupation for about 70 years. Under the Russian occupation. So obviously a lot of the education was Soviet. It was very good quality. I think literacy was 100%. I cannot think of an instance where anyone would leave school not knowing how to read, how to write, and be quite fluent in quite a lot of subjects. So we were taught, I thought, in a really good way where everyone leaving school, I think the final exams were about 17 exams. So when my daughter taking A-levels said, "Mommy, I have those 3 exams." I'm like, "Oh, Victoria, you have no idea." Exams. Try 17. And I showed her my high school diploma. And I said, "Look at all of these subjects I had to do, the chemistry, the biology, anatomy, physics. That's just the sciences, maths, everything you can possibly think of." So all of the, maybe not religion, because religion was banned in the Soviet times, but so we didn't have RE, but computer science, PE. Yeah, when you add everything, geography, history, probably not just one history, but it would be Russian history, it would be Uzbek history, it was international history. So, and every subject, it wasn't, definitely, there was no technology. You couldn't even, it was very different. It was very much oral examination. So you had to actually talk about the subject with Russian and Russian literature. We had to write essays, 2-3 hours long exams. So it's every day for about a month and a half. So it's, but a lot of memorization, a lot of learning of facts. But I always compared sort of level of maths, for instance, in Russia, in Uzbekistan, in all of the former Soviet Union countries to English maths, the way it's taught here in England. And I felt, and I think a lot of my colleagues or friends would always say it's far more superior than what's being taught in England. On the other hand, we didn't really play. It was very, very structured, very serious education. Even teachers, we had a lot of respect for teachers. So I think from the first day of my first school year, I always wanted to be a teacher. I just had so much love and respect for teachers that to me, this was like an ideal thing to be. Whereas in England, it's not the same. There is not the same level of respect for the teaching as a profession or for teachers, which is really shocking to me. Behavior in where I come from was, we've never had anyone misbehave. It was just very strict. No, there was no punishments or anything. Obviously, if you didn't learn, you would be speaking to the head teacher, but everyone had a lot of respect, parents and teachers, and students for the teachers. So, but a lot of memorization, lots of tests, lots of assessments, and not much play, which I feel probably something that could add value. Like in primary school, I just love how my son comes home and I ask him, "What did you learn?" "Oh, Victorian punishments." I'm like, "Oh, wow, tell me all about it." And his favorite, horrible histories. And we have horrible histories books and horrible geographies and everything else. And every time I see the primary, school curriculum, there is a lot of learn through play. And I really, really love that. In Uzbekistan, we never played. It was just learn. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always wondered too about the merits of, very different kind of curriculum, and like oral examinations and that's a great way, I think, to actually test whether someone knows what they're talking about. Can they have a fluid conversation, make a presentation about it? And that maybe we get into that and talking about AI and how AI is changing assessment and things like that. But I do have to ask you before we move on, how good is Russian literature in the original? It was one of the only courses in university I got an A+ on was Russian literature. So I wish I could read it in the original, but yeah,
oh my goodness.
how
that's very
it was
rare.
just because I loved it. Yeah. How did that like when did you read Dostoevsky first, for example?
Dostoevsky, I think this is compulsory. So Crime and Punishment, for instance, would be read probably when you're 16, I imagine. You're mature enough to understand the symbolics of, Dostoevsky, the representation of yellow, the depression, all of that. So it's a really interesting piece of writing. And of course, Tolstoy's War and Peace, again, 1617. So this would be in the last 2 or 3 years, because these are very mature authors, and you don't just read it lightly. It takes time to read and understand. And then sort of, we write essays, we take personas. And when we're learning Pushkin and we're reading Onegin, we had to actually learn the words and, all of the poems and everything. So it was
I love it.
Amazing. So, yes.
So that's what I would make mandatory. Yeah, if I was education czar for a day, would be, if not full-blown Russian literature, certainly Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Chekhov.
Should be in the curriculum. I totally agree with you.
Along with an introduction to philosophy. But anyway, I digress. I had to ask you that. So you have this, and it's very interesting to me. This kind of Soviet style education that obviously, the entire Soviet Union had brilliant minds and engineers and all kinds of really, really well educated people. What did you study that most impacted how you think today, and how did you pursue that, say, beyond high school?
Well, I was probably very, very fortunate. Again, my mom made sure that we moved very close to a school that was specialized in English, English as a language, English as a foreign language. So she really wanted us, all three of us, to learn a foreign language. She thought this would really open up the world to us. And for me, she was definitely right, because it just made an incredible impact on my life. And not so much for my sister or my brother, but I kind of was the only one that really took that advice very deeply. And I remember the teacher that we had. She was one of those award-winning teachers in Uzbekistan, Tamara Mikhailovna, her name was. She was Russian. And she had connections with Peace Corps volunteers. So Peace Corps had an office in the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent. And somehow Peace Corps was supplying American teachers into a lot of the schools across Uzbekistan. And so Bukhara, as a town, were very lucky. So we had a teacher we had a new teacher every year coming to our school. So we had a lot of interaction with foreign teachers. But then I believe quite a few schools, and even our Bukhara University, had quite a few foreigners that were supplied through Peace Corps. And these were, a lot of the times, these were teachers of economics, these were teachers of various other subjects, and of course, English teachers, American English teachers. So a little bit different, of course, but we just had, we were just very lucky that we had this ability to interact with authentic foreigners. So not just Uzbeks or Russians who were taught how to teach English, but we were interacting with foreigners. And that made it really exciting for us to come into school and ask them a lot of questions. And we had an English club, and I was super active. I think those were the building blocks, being able to interact with people from outside of my own little world, because Bukhara is a very small town. You whisper something in one part of the town, they will hear it in the other. So, of course, we had this very tight-knit community of students who were as eager to learn English as I was. So we were practicing our conversational English. So we had a lot of these Peace Corps volunteers who used to get together once a week on a Sunday. We had an English club, and that's where all of my foundational blocks were, where I could borrow books in English, and I would take them home and read with a highlighter or pencil, because there were so many words I could not understand. And then my mom supplied us, and she bought all of the biggest, massive dictionaries, that think English to Russian, Russian to English, English to English, everything. And it was amazing. It was so fantastic for my vocabulary. I used to participate in English language competitions, what we call Olympiads. So probably from the Olympic Games. So it was very competitive. So in classes, I would win, and then intra-school, I would go to the next level. Then suddenly, a regional competition and another competition. So it was very competitive. So I kind of took English super seriously in sort of grammar, conversational, written English. So for me, this was a really great way to read the news, like The Economist. So I would always ask my teachers, if they're flying, can you please bring me The Economist, or some magazine that I could read, something that could just tell me what's happening around the world, because Google was non-existent. The news was very redacted. It was English, Russia Today equivalent, but it was Moscow news. So everything we were receiving was probably from the lens of the Russian politics. Uzbek news, maybe we did have one or two channels, but in those days, nobody would listen to anything in Uzbek. I mean, I actually don't speak Uzbek. This is one of the languages that's from my country, but I really do not speak it, because it was introduced when I was 11, and I already made up my mind. Why would I need to speak Uzbek when I can speak English already? So it was, I think that was probably the most sort of impactful thing for me, was to be able to learn English, to be able to interact and communicate and read and understand what's happening around the world. So, and then of course, the next big thing that happened was discovering debating. Oh my goodness. I think every school should have a debate club. It's incredible. It really opens up your mind, not only to critical thinking, but really learning, how to argue, how to put your case together, and how to counter argue as well, but also how to think critically and analytically. And again, in those days, we didn't really have any computers. So when I started debating, it was probably late. I was already 19. I was already at university, so not even in school anymore. But I always thought, wow, if only debating was introduced at secondary school level, at least, it would have made an even more of an impact on how I was developing. But primary school, secondary school, it was my interaction with people who represent other worlds that made an impact, because I was working from a very early age as a tour guide from about age 14, 15. I used to get calls from the museum. Everyone knew my mom, and everyone knew my mom's daughter speaks English. So when they were short of supplies of tour guides, I'd say, oh, please, we know, Alena speaks English. Can we please ask her, there is a group on the weekend. We just don't have enough people, because it's such a popular city. Everyone, comes to meet and see all of the beautiful monuments that we have. If she's free, can she give a tour? We only need her for half a day. So, and suddenly I would be in front of some American ambassador or British Council director, or somebody who works at Amnesty International or some other non-governmental organization. So they were not just an ordinary people in England or Canada or somewhere. They were people who probably worked hard to get to Uzbekistan, to be in the position that they are, the leadership position that they are. So they're your, C-suite. And so it was amazing to interact with those type of people at the age of 14, 15. I mean, I would just be, the luckiest person ever, because I could ask them about what's happening in the world of politics, or what's happening in Palestine, or, in the Middle East, what kind of wars are happening? Where is peace? Where is war? What is happening? Because the kind of information we were receiving in the news was very limited. So my world of information, my window to the world was, my experiences, my conversations with foreigners. And they were not just any foreigners, they were ambassadors and whatnot. So I had the most exciting time as somebody who was a teenager, aged sort of 14 to 18, which is, I think, where the foundation of a lot of things in your mind, you are learning the foundational blocks that almost define you as a person. So all of that was happening with me having that interaction with people who are not even from Uzbekistan. So I was super lucky in that way.
Well, I mean, it almost sounds like you grew up in an Indiana Jones movie, or maybe Laura Croft in Tomb Raider is the more appropriate comparison. But that sounds really interesting, and it's also interesting and how quickly we forget how difficult information was to come by.
Very.
And it's certainly interesting hearing your perspective in the Soviet Union and how information just trickled along. And that might be an interesting point of comparison when we talk about AI.
And dangerous sometimes dangerous as well, because I remember I was very outspoken about women's rights when I was about 14, 15, and I was interviewed by a Scandinavian magazine about women's rights in Uzbekistan. And then the next day, somebody knocked on the door and spoke to my mum and said, well, we heard your daughter just having a conversation and giving an interview about women's rights in Uzbekistan. So she should be careful. My mum was warned. So I was warned via my mum that I should not be talking about human rights, women's rights. It was a bit of a risk I was taking, probably, a bit ignorant, but also a little bit, who cares? I'm young, free, I'm only 15, 16. Why shouldn't I be talking about what I thought was, freedom of speech, something that I probably learned about, through conversations with foreigners who probably take freedom of speech for granted where they come from. So it wasn't really as safe, but luckily nothing happened. And luckily I managed to get away with just learning and talking and thinking in the free way that I was able to think, with absolutely no access to internet at that time at all.
That's wonderful. Okay, so take us to, how do you get involved from there to eventually founding Teens in AI? You can take that any way you want in any direction, but I'm interested in how, you have this really, really sounds like rich upbringing in the former Soviet Union, and you have all this exposure to, when you say foreigners, I imagine people from the West that are traveling through the areas that you grew up in. You learn English, and now do you go away for university? Do you go to the West? Do you travel?
In Uzbekistan, it's very rare that one wouldn't go to university. It's extremely rare. I think 99.9%, I imagine, go to university. And if you don't go, it's very unusual. I can't think of any reasons why somebody would not go to university. Probably if there are some other options to study somewhere else. But everyone still carries on studying. People don't just leave and start working. That's impossible. They would go on to either study at university or business college or some form of college. So I definitely decided, okay, I would be studying something that at that time I thought was in demand. So I studied economics for a whole year until I thought Bukhara is a very small town and the world is very big. So I started already plotting and thinking, where can I go from Bukhara? So obviously the nearest location was Tashkent, the capital. Everyone goes to the capital, wherever you are. I guess, people from outside of London are trying to get into London to go to some of the best universities and whatnot. And it was the same in Uzbekistan. Somebody from the suburbs, somebody from the towns would always try to have the ambition to go and study in the capital. So that was my dream. And I was very lucky at that time in Tashkent. We were told about this very unique elite faculty of business management that was taught all in English, which is like, oh my God, my dream to study in English. And of course, this was taught by foreigners. It was called Malaysian faculty. So I'm not sure why. I think there must have been a partnership between Uzbekistan and Malaysian government. The education was in English in that faculty, only 100 students. So very, very elite, super difficult to get into. So I just decided to try and transfer myself. So I was very lucky. They accepted me, and it was also on a scholarship because I got into university on a scholarship, something that is so hard to achieve in the UK or in the West. Universities are so expensive. Yes, shockingly, which is why my daughter, for instance, decided to go down the apprenticeship route. But in Uzbekistan, it was free. I was very lucky. You take exams to go to university. So they don't just take your high school, grades as a fact. They will still test you. You still have to take your English, maths, Russian, whatnot, several subjects. And if you get to the top level in terms of your score, then you get to study for free. If you haven't been lucky and you're in the bottom of the list, then you still get to go to university, but you have to pay. It's private, so it becomes commercial. So they reward, I wouldn't call it intelligence, I suppose memorization and being able to get into university based on your grades and ability to write essays and pass exams. So I suppose I had a good enough memory to pass that exam, maths and whatnot, and history. I think get in and studied for my entire university education in Uzbekistan completely for free, which is in the UK it's almost unheard of, which is such a shame. But I was very lucky. Again, I was exposed to a lot of foreigners, a lot of professors who were teaching us in English. Business management, obviously, this was to do with marketing, statistics, and whatnot. But it exposed me to a different ecosystem. So Tashkent as a capital was very fast-paced, moved really much faster than the small town I was from. But knowing me, I kind of thought, this is just so boring just to study. So I got involved as a volunteer and just nominated myself and invited myself to work for free. I said, I'm here. So I got in touch with almost every single person I had a chance to tour in Bukhara. So I kept all of their contacts, whether it's a Peace Corps director or American ambassador or British Council director. I just got in touch with them and said, hey, do you remember me? I am such and such. I'm here in Tashkent. I want to basically work, but I can work for free. So I volunteered. To me, this was the best way to get into a working environment. And I kind of recommend this a lot to some of the students and teenagers I interact with. I always say, try to find a way for you to get in, even if as a volunteer, because as soon as you get in as a volunteer, you show them your capabilities and how amazing you are. It will be very difficult for them to say no to you if if you made yourself indispensable, which is what my goal was always. How do I make myself so useful that if they ever let me go, they kind of feel it, that, oh, Elena is not there anymore. And they hopefully never let me go, or they offer me a paid position. So that was kind of my way to figure out my way into the industry. And that kind of worked. So I was studying and I was working. So I was already at the age of 19, doing a really cool project in the Aral Sea. So Jason, it's a really, really interesting place. If you ever go to Central Asia, the Aral Sea, which no longer is a sea, it's a sort of very dried up area, caused a lot of, health conditions and whatnot for the people, because they sea dried and it exposed people to a lot of salt that they're having to breathe in and whatnot. So it's a really interesting, politically speaking, a very interesting area, but also environmentally a real a human-made, man-made disastrous place to visit one day. So I was there with a consultant from the British Council, trying to help a group of women. There were about 20 women making crafts, embroidery and weaving and all sorts of really interesting things that Uzbek tradition brought sort of, and they were reviving those crafts. So I met a consultant whose aim was to revive artisanal crafts, and I found myself part of this project, and my role was to take all of the stuff that they produce and then sell it in Tashkent. So I was only 19 and I had about 20 women and their livelihoods dependent on my ability to sell. So that was a fun project to do when you're 19 and you're just learning the ropes, so to speak, and learning everything as you go. So it was very entrepreneurial, although in those days I didn't really call it that way. It was my job. So I just had to figure out, and I just used to go to all the places in the capital with all of the produce, and they would look, pick what they want, give me cash, and then I had to take it all to those women, give it all to them and hope that this was good enough. And so that was fun and exciting. And we even had some women who were quite unwell, physically could not really do embroidery because of a really terrible condition linked to arthritis or something like that, where they couldn't really, move their hands properly, but still managed to do the embroidery. And that piece of embroidery, I remember, was sent to the Queen of England because it's British Council project, I guess. So they sent it to the Queen of England, and this lady received a note from the Queen thanking her for this beautiful piece of work that she managed to produce despite her disabilities, and was, yes, she was hardly able to move, but she was able to do this. But the impact on this incredible lady was that she stopped her medication in about 9 months, because the confidence, the fact that she was able to make a living and earn was enough for her to almost to rehabilitate her, to make her better. So I couldn't really explain it in any other way other than a miracle, but she was able to carry on working and sustain herself and her small family. So for me, this was one of those incredible lessons that I kind of thought about many years later, how it was possible for somebody who was suffering, not only mentally, but physically as well, and able to help herself in so many different ways, psychologically and in other ways. So it was amazing stories that I kind of came to see and learn from as I was exposed to this crazy way of working and studying and everything else. And then I married that consultant and left abroad, and things have developed in different ways afterwards. That's when all my traveling started, and I finally managed to learn about the other side of the world that I've never seen. I was just reading about.
Well, I mean, I find it absolutely fascinating how you just seem to be a kind of force of nature, in the sense that you said it all there in the volunteering aspect of, like, you just showed up, did the work, learned, and kept, doing that until, I love that at 19, you are selling for the livelihoods of many, many women, and that pressure and that ability to go and figure it out is, I think, what a lot of, at least people in the West and like generations younger than me even, I don't think they understand properly. Like, so much can happen by just putting yourself out there and getting to work and learning and failing and repeating and not being too worried about failing or any of that. So that's fascinating to me. So now you are exploring the West. Now you are traveling. You are truly a woman of the world. How do you get involved in AI?
How do I get involved in AI? My goodness. Well, after quite a bit of traveling and then realizing that my marriage was no longer fit for purpose, so to speak, unfortunately, there came a time that I didn't feel it was serving me, my daughter. We've had some domestic violence issues, so we had to run and stay in the women's refuge for about 6 months. So I kind of had this incredible experience, kind of starting out in my career from as early as 14 to then doing some amazing things that I thought a young person was meant to be doing. I was told later in life that I just didn't live my life. What about all the parties? What about all the fun? And I'm like, for me, fun was work. For me, fun was always meeting really intelligent, interesting people. That's fun. That's party for me. So it was a different, upbringing, I suppose I had that was more important to me, meeting people and knowing that I could be doing something incredible and making a difference and changing lives. So that's party. And so of course, when you're in a family, when you have your child, some priorities shift because obviously you're focused on your family. And then of course, if you're in a relationship that is very controlling and abusive, then you almost feel very stifled. You feel like you're trapped. You feel like you can no longer be yourself and you can no longer do what you feel like you've come here to do. So I kind of got a little bit stuck in my life when my daughter was only 4 or 5. And I just didn't have the freedom to do what I thought I could do or wanted to do, which is work in the third sector, work in the UN, bring world peace. So I was studying international relations at that time. So for me, working in the non-for-profit sector or humanitarian organizations was the way to go, because I thought, wow, I want to do something big in the world. I want to change the world. So it wasn't really happening in the way that I thought, and the relationship wasn't working. So it had to come to an end. And it was a bit tragic the way it happened when we were in Bangladesh. And I thought I could not even escape the marriage at all. I thought I would probably not be alive for long because it was not going well at all. So I had threats, to almost sort of sleeping pills, take all these sleeping pills and you will just fall asleep and I'll take care of Victoria. So it just became dangerous for me, not for Victoria, but definitely for me. And I just had to make this incredibly big decision at that point in my life to leave my marriage. And I had no idea what will happen to me, but I just thought enough was enough. And even if I have to go back to Uzbekistan, I don't really mind. I don't care, because it just wasn't safe anymore. So we had to come back, from Bangladesh to England. And that ended my adventuring abroad for a while because of divorce and trying to also stay in the UK on the rights that I had, or I felt I didn't. The person I was with, my ex-husband, was trying to deport me. It was super tough to be in the courtroom with the Home Office, who were adamant and telling me that domestic violence is physical only and that I don't have bruises on my body to prove that I was a victim. And I could not believe it. I thought, wow, I had no idea that domestic violence was just physical. And of course, I had a very good barrister, pro bono as well, who represented me. And she said, well, that's just not true. So she argued my case, and I remained in the UK on the grounds of domestic violence when I thought was, okay, it's the end of this chapter and now I can be free again. So I was only 28 at that time when this was happening. So still young, lots of things I thought I could look forward to. But those 7 years of my life prior to this was almost like, I'm not sure how I would describe this, but it's almost like being trapped in a cage.
How did you find the mental fortitude to push through and escape that situation?
Well, I don't know. I just was always, I guess, I just never stopped moving forward. I kind of always knew there was something at the end of the tunnel. I never wanted to give up. And unfortunately, I have seen women, even in the refuge, who did give up. I have seen women who would go back the next day to be back in that relationship, which brought me to tears a lot of the times when I saw that. I almost blamed myself. Maybe I should have spoken to that woman. Maybe I should have told her that it's okay, that she can do it. I don't know, but I just was in that mindset that I will fight until the end, because I had threats of my daughter being taken away from me. You know, I was given threats to kind of deport me, have me deported to Uzbekistan. So I was fortunately supported by some amazing women who were managing that women's refuge center, the shelter, that hosted me with no funding. Like, I had no rights in the UK. I was just a spouse, you know, and as a spouse of a foreign individual in the UK, you don't have many rights, because he's meant to provide, he's meant to be the one. And when he doesn't, then you're on your own. So it was a massive risk I took, because I was really worried. You know, we had to survive on food bank. So these days when I go to the supermarket and I have the, you know, the trolley that collects food bank, I always contribute, because I know there is a woman in the women's refuge who will probably be grateful that there is that tin of beans or something else. And yeah, we had no money. I came to the women's refuge with £20 in my pocket, nothing else. And that £20 in 2008, it lasted, a week? So, and that was it. And the women's refuge had the funds. They said, we will take care of you, don't worry. And then when I received the letter stating, hey, your husband keeps writing to us and tells us we should deport you, maybe you should just go home. And I actually was so excited, because I haven't seen my mom in almost 7 years at that time, because he wouldn't let me go back to Uzbekistan. So that's, and I thought, oh yeah, maybe I should go home. And Victoria, I'm sure, you know, we'll find my mom, you know, is always there. You know, as parents, we're always there for our kids. But yeah, the refuge, the shelter told me, you have to stay and you have to fight, because if you don't, then you will be sent back and you will lose your daughter. So I had no choice. I just had to fight, and I had to find a way. And if only I thought that divorce and just leaving that relationship was the answer. So for me, it was not. For the next 7 years, I was in court. So I thought, oh, wow, I'm still, 28. That's fine. I've got enough time. I have things to catch up with. But yes, it took quite a bit more time for me to actually find my way into London, where I thought, wow, exciting things will now happen, because finally I'm in London, not in Bournemouth by the beach, which was pretty but unhelpful. So my ex-husband stayed there. I managed to convince him to let me go. I signed an agreement with him and I promised I would bring Victoria every other weekend back to him. So it was me doing my master's degree full-time, kind of studying, doing my exams, and master's was quite intense. It was in war studies because I really wanted to go to the UN and do some peace development post-conflict. That was my dream. It just always was politics and international relations. And suddenly every other weekend I had to take Victoria. So I was quite exhausted, particularly when I got pregnant with my son. I was in a new relationship that was quite something to be pregnant and doing your master's, and this person to travel to every other weekend. And of course, when he found out that I was pregnant, that was again back to court, basically. So it was like that. So my journey into AI was kind of very, very long, convoluted, very accidental. I would be very honest, because I'm not really a technologist. I was just a mom who stumbled upon a conversation between her daughter and her teacher, and the teacher was telling my daughter, hey Victoria, why do you want to take computer science? It's boring, it's for boys. Why don't you do sociology instead? Yeah, psychology, sociology, these are for girls, it's more exciting than I'll get to mentor you. And I was just sitting there listening, and wondering what's going on. We're in London, and she's telling my daughter that computer science was boring. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know how boring or fun computer science is, but surely this is not the message to put into any child's mind that they can't do something. And I think that's what bothered me. Somebody telling me that I can't do something, and somebody telling my daughter that she can't do something. So that was strange. And I thought, all right, well, I'm in London. I'm surrounded by a lot of entrepreneurs. The tech ecosystem was buzzing at that time. We're talking 2013, 2014. So it was like really vibrant. We have Google Campus. We have Innovate UK. We have so much innovation happening in London, and you literally cannot just be in London without knowing some entrepreneurs, some meetups, startup boot camp or whatever. So I thought, all right, well, I don't think saying that to a young child who's only 13 is appropriate. So I said, Victoria, let me investigate. Let me see what I can do to actually give you a different perspective of what the tech is and what computer science is. And so I started educating myself, and I realized that actually computer science is very creative, very exciting, and there is a place for everyone in tech. And even if you're not there doing coding, you could still be there doing a lot of other things. That is kind of what I inferred from all of my research and from communicating to a lot of women in tech and just people in tech. So I found a hackathon called Product Hunt Hackathon in London, and it was for adults. It was not for kids. So I said, oh, Victoria, let's just go on a mom and daughter weekend, a date, so to speak. And we're going to spend the whole weekend, in a hackathon. And she was like, oh, what's a hackathon? I'm like, I have no idea. Let's just figure it out. Let's find out what it is. And I just thought it was really cool. Random people getting together and building something for impact. What can be cooler than that? Seriously, even today, I ask myself, what is better than a hackathon? Nothing. Literally, this is where innovation happens. This is where communication happens. This is where networking happens. This is where you get to learn about real problems in life, in the world. And you get a chance to build something very impactful with a bunch of people who are as passionate as you are. A hackathon will never attract a person who is not passionate about something. You have to be passionate to be in that place to begin with. So I'm such a massive believer that my hackathons attract people who want to change the world in the same way as any hackathon attracts a crowd of people who want to change the world. It's a place for change makers. So for me, this was an ideal place to find myself. So I thought, wow, it was almost like a reconnection with myself, with my core, which was, how can I improve the world? What can I do? How can I contribute? And it was amazing to bring my daughter into it, who was only 12. She had no idea. Even I had no idea what I was leading myself into. But 2 days, that's all it took to inspire me and to inspire my daughter. And it was amazing. She kept asking me, when is the next one? When can I go again? And I was like, this is the question you want from your child. And any child coming into your history class, leaving that history class, wanting to come back and asking, what are we going to learn the next history class? What am I going to learn in the next maths class? And that is what I got from my daughter. I got that spark. I got that incredible, spark of curiosity, which I just don't see enough of these days. And it just makes me really sad, because I think that's why the company I run is very global, very international, because when I can't see that spark in the UK, I can see that spark in a girl from India, from Pakistan, from Ghana, from Ethiopia. So, and I always look for that spark. It's what excites me. It energizes me. It makes me want to live for something, for a purpose. And when you have something to live for, and that's amazing. This is kind of what you are here for. And when it dies, when you're just existing and just perpetuating that thing that you're doing, however you're living, and there is no purpose, there is no spark, that is the death of that innate something, that I don't even know what to call it, but it's that purpose that we always have, that fire that has to be in us. And when that fire dies, why live? Why exist? Why bother? So I saw that in my daughter and I'm like, wow, this is it. And so she came back and again, and I thought, wow, this experience, that spark needs to be found in every child. How can we do this in this day and age where they're stuck in front of their laptops, they're stuck in the education that is so not fit for purpose, and it's so not purposeful as well. That's kind of what I saw in secondary school education, when there was this massive disconnect. Like in primary school, they play and everything is they're learning through play and everything, and they communicate, they interact, it's a lot more fun. Secondary school, it turns into death by exams in about 6 months after you enter secondary school. We were told, moms and dads, you're not going to recognize your children. They're going to switch just like that. And I thought that was a positive switch. I thought, wow, my daughter will probably be wanting to go to school to learn something, and there will be a purpose she will discover through education. And it didn't happen. In 6 months, all I could see was my daughter coming back home every day. Even when I would ask her, okay, let's go to a museum, she's like, no, mommy, I have, in 2 years, I have to pick my exams. The teacher said I have to learn. So every weekend I have to revise, I have to prepare. And I lost my daughter to this very I don't know how to call this education, but it's definitely felt like the TED talk that I heard from Ken Robinson, that education kills curiosity. Creativity, yes. And I saw that in my daughter, and I thought, wow, this was so true. And I felt sad. I actually felt really sad as a parent, and I thought, wow, this is so horrible to go to school just learning how to pass an exam. That's kind of like factory style, right? You're just learning how to be that, person who will just go to work, and where is that purpose? Where is that fire? With hackathons, I found, particularly when I started running my own, because I kind of needed that inspiration, and I also needed to see that fire, because for me, not doing something purposeful, is just wasting my lifetime. It was really that bad. I'm such a sad person. I still don't go to parties and ravings and whatnot. For me, it's really knowing that I'm making a difference to somebody's life, even one person's life. I think if you can change one person's life, that's it. This is amazing. And knowing that we have already inspired 15,000 young people across the world doing this work, building technology for impact for their communities, and using this as an also opportunity to further learn in some universities. So they don't just go to university just for the sake of a degree. They go to university knowing that I'm going to be learning computer science because I want to build this technology. I want to build that startup that will solve X, Y, and Z problem. That is why kids need to go to university, because they have found that spark, that some reason to go to do something, not just, oh, I need a degree. So I kind of thought, wow, this is it. Schools should be like hackathons, because that's where you solve real problems that are needed, because the world is full of problems. If our young people are not equipped with the skills to solve them, what hope do we have for the world? What hope do we have for those young people, for that next generation? So for me, when people say, oh, Elena, hackathons, you're just teaching them how to code. I'm like, oh, this is such an insult. Please don't tell me that hackathons are there just to teach how to code. Sometimes wonder whether we're just branding it incorrectly, but everyone knows what a hackathon is. And for us, it's about finding a purpose and learning the skills to further that purpose in life. I think that's how I would these days describe what a hackathon is. But kids leave knowing that they've learned something new, something that they will never learn in schools, which is a bit of a shame, because I really wish we could bring hackathons into schools. But at the same time, they always ask me, Elena, when is the next one? When is the next one? When can I come back? And it was a bit of a shame when COVID started that we had to stop a lot of the face-to-face hackathons and move online. It was almost like the call for innovate or die. How do we as a company, as a social enterprise, go through this really tough stage of COVID when, suddenly face-to-face hackathons were just no longer a thing and we had to digitize or die. And we figured it out, granted, but still, that is how I got into tech and into AI. AI just became another cool hack that we decided to run and focus niche on AI. And I had no idea at that time that it would just pick up and everyone would just become suddenly excited when it was just tech for good hackathon or augmented reality hackathon or virtual reality hackathon. Nobody cared. As soon as we added the word AI and started teaching kids AI skills, suddenly United Nations wants to know, Elena, how do you teach AI, which is a pretty complex system, and not only from the technology and technical perspective, but also the ethics and everything else that goes into the building of those systems. How do you teach that? It's almost like a moral code. How do you teach something responsibly, right? Because you can build Python, you can build a game, but you can also build something purposeful and something responsibly versus just building for the sake of building. And I think this is kind of where a lot of people have taken interest in the work that we do. How do we ensure that whatever kids are learning when it comes to AI or cutting edge technologies, how do we make sure they're using these skills for something impactful and are not using this to the detriment of the world? That is, I think, is the core question that I'm trying to kind of further.
Interesting. Very interesting. So a large part of this audience will be North American educators, people from teachers themselves to superintendents across Canada and the US. How would you describe the actual work that you do with students? Because a lot of them have asked me, about not only different products out there, different resources, but what student-facing resources there are out there. So can you kind of describe your curriculum for teens as you help them explore AI?
Absolutely. So we started, I think back in 2018, just teaching very classic things that are correlated with AI. So we teach Python, we started teaching TensorFlow, we started teaching some of the foundational blocks of what AI systems are built or using. From then on, I think what was missing is the why. Why are we building those technologies? What are we building this for? So we introduced a really innovative concept or framework called design thinking. So we do not start any program, particularly if it is a hackathon or a boot camp, without that why. What is the problem? Why are we here? What are we doing here? And so every hackathon that we start, we always start with challenges that we frame along the lines of United Nations Development Sustainable Goals. So these are the 17 goals that you can find on the website. The ones that we noticed kids really love are the ones related to education, because kids that come to our hackathons always want to change something within education or within healthcare. Oftentimes when it comes to healthcare, they think of it as mental health. So it's really interesting to see how they see technology, fit in various problems that they are experiencing. So it very much is always starting with the problem. And this is a really interesting starting point. So design thinking and various steps within design thinking as a framework helps us narrow down some of the problems and helps kids understand that when they're building something, they have to take a human-centered approach, meaning that they're building something for the real world, for the real humans who will be using that product. And so it's important to include those humans in the design of that product. So let's say if we're building something and the problem is related to domestic violence, we would be engaging with, organizations who work with women and help those women in various situations. And so we had a team of girls who we put in touch with a few of those organizations, and even some forums where they could ask questions and anonymously, receive some of the data about some of the circumstances of the women. And build a solution that was actually fitting for the real people experiencing those problems. So, for instance, a few months ago, we were in Madrid, and a group of teens have built a product for kids who suffer with diabetes, so that they could understand more about the condition that they have, and also how to track whether the lifestyle that they're maintaining is appropriate for diabetes or it's, hindering it. So it very much always starts with a problem. So we use design thinking as an incredible way to kind of get to the bottom of the problems, ask the right questions, do a lot of third-party research, but also with some programs, we're able to actually go out of the room and speak to real people. And I think there is so much value in being able to interact with real people, potential users who are experiencing that pain. So that's one of the things we do. The second thing, obviously, because these are machine learning or AI hackathons, we teach some of the fundamentals of AI, what AI is and what AI is not. And of course, there is so much that has happened recently, particularly with the onset of generative AI. A lot of people think that AI is just generative AI, but there is a lot more to it. So we try to demystify what AI is and what AI is not. And when we talk about AI, we also explore AI ethics. What are the principles of ethical building of those systems? Because you can build things ethically, and you can also build things that will harm communities and societies. And so we talk about various case studies that happened recently or back in 2014, 2015, and we're talking about some very well-known case studies of Microsoft, say releasing a chatbot called Tay back in 2015, I think, or 2016 it was, when after interacting with people on Twitter, it started, interacting in a very fascist way. And that's because it was learning from the people it was interacting with. And people on Twitter, sadly, there are some great conversations, and then there are some not very great conversations. Twitter is like full of lots of unpleasant interactions, shall we put it this way. So, of course, it learned from real conversation. That's what happened. We talk about a very classic Google case where somebody put into Google search gorilla, and it came with the pictures of black people. And somebody said, well, this is my girlfriend is not a gorilla, fix your algorithm, Google. And that was these are the kind of stories that we discuss, and we want to understand from teenagers, from students. How do you feel about this? What do you think went wrong? What would you have done better had you been there? So those are kind of some of the really interesting ethical dilemmas or ethical considerations that we want them to think about when they build something. Because like I said, you can build Python, but you can also use that same line of code for something really bad. And we want to ideally prevent something horrible from happening. So the typical curriculum will have quite a lot of discussion about not only about AI and teaching kids how to do Python and TensorFlow and various frameworks and libraries that we go into, but also how do we make sure we build things responsibly. So responsibility is a very core focus of every program. And of course, with this, depending on the program, sometimes we have a very entrepreneurial focus. So the focus of our summer program called AI for Good Incubator is very much related to climate action. So we want kids to step into the shoes of a social entrepreneur and actually build something that addresses a real problem related to climate, whether it's carbon emission, whether it's related to tracking in species of animals that are becoming extinct, or collecting sounds of birds or other animals in the jungles for the purposes of specific research and whatnot. So it's really, really interesting to give them this opportunity to step into literally for 5 days. It doesn't really need that long either. So we only have 5 days to build something very impactful that will change, something for the better within climate, which is kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, because there is, of course, a lot of research these days about the impact of LLMs and large language model systems and AI system on climate. Whereas also there is quite a lot of evidence of how AI system can impact climate as well. So it's kind of trying to also cover both and explain to kids, we are playing with all of these technologies this day and age, ChatGPT and Canva and whatnot, but every time you put a prompt into ChatGPT, what impact does it have on the environment? So there's a lot of discussion like this that's happening that could be relevant not only to your classes in computer science or ICT, but it is also very relevant to philosophy classes. It's relevant to English. It's relevant to your business classes. It's relevant to geography, which is climate action, but it could be relevant to physics because there is a lot of physics and maths in AI. So everything we do in our programs, it's your applied maths, really, because maths is the foundation of AI and physics as well. So this is your applied physics and applied AI. But we could bring in so many other subjects. It's very interdisciplinary, and it really ties in across so many different subjects, which is why I find this so exciting, because it doesn't just fall into the domain of computer science. It is so beyond that, and it is not even a technology. We call it a socio-economic system because it interacts with the world like nothing else does. Any other, language, it's, JavaScript or whatnot, we build websites with this. With AI systems, we don't just build a system, we build a system that people interact with every day. It has an impact on the society. It collects data. It is trained on data, oftentimes without consent. It sometimes doesn't account into your privacy. And we have no idea about the intentions of those who are building those systems. There is so much going on where it ties into politics. It ties into elections. There have been, over 50 elections just in 2024, that it has the potential to overthrow governments. It's not just a technology. AI is so much more than that. And that makes it one of those most exciting subjects to learn and understand from a really early age, because whether you like it or not, and I really wish I could wish it away, like I really wish I could just put a stop to ChatGPT and all of the LLMs today. But I can't do this, unfortunately, because I'm not as optimistic. I'm kind of sitting on the fence because I can see so many horrible things happening. Even I think a week ago, The Guardian published something about a child protection agency in Australia that has used ChatGPT and put details of a child who was an at-risk child, into ChatGPT. I was a little bit shocked, not a little bit, how this could have even happened, that people using those systems do not understand how dangerous some of the user cases can be, that there are certain cases where you should not be using them at all. So it's all very like fun and games. A lot of people think, oh, wow, I can now create my lessons. I can now create, even as a parent, the other day, I asked my teacher, what's Alexander learning, in term 1? And he sent me a whole sort of outline without any detail, just like, okay, Victorian times. I'm like, okay, that's not much, but okay, I can go with that. So I just loaded it into ChatGPT and, okay, well, based on this information, so he's learning about Victorian times, he's learning about habitats in sciences, he's learning about whatnot, what resources are there for me as a parent to support my child. It was amazing. I loved it. And I even asked it to create a 10-week plan so that week by week after school, I can support my kid. Well, I'm just one of those kind of parents. It's because I guess schools in England, I don't know how they are in Canada, in the US, they're so secretive. Like you literally have no idea what they're learning.
Not
and
too
there
different.
is no way.
Not too different here.
Not different. I have no idea. As a parent, like we had a diary. My mom knew every day.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just a term I want to get out, the AI-enabled parent, because I think any parent listening to this now, you just gave a great
hack,
tip as to how to help hack your child's curriculum. That was great.
Yes, just send an email to the teacher. Yes.
Look, so what's becoming abundantly apparent to me right now is that we need to have another conversation about the ethics and Maybe it's both the ethics and opportunities and perils of AI, because there are many things that you touched on that I would love to go very much deeper. And I know my audience is thinking about these things as well. But maybe for the sake of this discussion today, and maybe we consider this by way of intro, not only to your fascinating life, but to the fascinating work that you're doing. You're one of the folks that kind of sits on the periphery of the education system, if I can put it that way. You're very much involved in education, but from a much more, let's say, entrepreneurial and mission-driven perspective. What do you see education looking like, given all that you know about AI and all the work that you're doing? What does it look like in the future to you? Pick an indeterminate amount of time, something stupid like 25 or 50 years. I know it's hard to predict, but what do you see the system looking like?
I think by then, for sure, there will be a lot of personalized learning systems, hopefully a lot more ethical than there are right now. So I always say, please hold your horses. Don't just jump into this and think, somebody's coming to sell me personalized learning and I'll just go for it. By then, I think there will be a lot more regulation. Hopefully by then, the training data set that is used in those personalized learning systems will be more ethically sourced. And what I mean by that is that right now, we have no idea how these systems are trained. A lot of the open AI systems are trained on whatever is on the internet. When a journalist asked a previous CTO, what did you train your data set on to produce Sora AI, which was one of the latest products? She gave a very inconclusive answer. She just said, well, whatever is open license, whatever is open source, that's what we use. So obviously kind of giving us this indication that it was probably trained on whatever is on Google, this Crave data. Whatever is on YouTube. So if it is for video, then probably a lot of data from YouTube. So whatever you put out there, know that right now, everything is basically, there is nobody is asking for anyone's consent. Whether you have put something out on YouTube and maybe you kind of, you wouldn't like this to be used for the training data set, I guarantee they probably won't ask you these days because there is no regulation. There is nothing in there to stop them at the moment. Even some of the better known large language model systems, they have, even the CEOs of those systems, they have come out very clearly saying, well, we have to train the data set on what we already have available on the internet. And of course, there is no regulation stopping them right now to do this. So, so of course, in 20-25 years, I hope that there will either be regulation that regulates these companies better so that we end up with the kind of models that are ethical. They're labeled in ethical ways, not in the way that lately they have been labeled, say in Africa. They're being paid very, very little to label some of the most traumatic content, sexually explicit content, and without any form of rehabilitation or talking about it or any form of treatment afterwards. So these are humans who are labeling data and being paid very, very little. So there is a lot of ethical consideration when it comes to how currently these AI systems are built. They're built for a specific purpose, mostly commercial. So obviously that would always be something in the back of my mind if I am a teacher or an educator, head teacher, interacting with somebody who's trying to sell me a system that is going to create that personalized, system for the students or whatnot. I would be asking very tough questions. What did you train your data on? What will this data that you're collecting on our children, because obviously they're collecting children on how our kids are going to be learning. So how long are you going to be retaining this data? What kind of data is this? And, systems do get hacked. That's why we're teaching cybersecurity. In fact, today we're releasing a free cybersecurity course, and that is because cybersecurity and AI are very intertwined. And of course, systems are not are impossible not to hack. It's impossible to it's super, super difficult. OpenAI had incidents of hacking, 23andMe, hello, this is like very recent, still in press. So many different case studies and user cases where we're just really concerned. Because if you're adding children's data, if you're working with children's institutions, you have to put the highest and most secure, guardrails and safeguarding mechanisms to make sure that this data remains anonymized, protected, and we're not putting any child at risk. So as an educator, somebody in school, this is what I would be asking. Of course, us as a company, we don't sell any of this technology. We're equipping or empowering kids with knowledge. So we want them to understand these risks. We want the teachers, the parents to be aware of these kind of risks. I mean, I personally joined a smartphone-free childhood campaign here in the UK. I don't know, Jason, whether you've heard of it. It's picking up super fast, and it's us parents who are quite concerned about the amount of time our children are spending on smartphones being targeted by a lot of these AI systems, because every algorithm out there at the moment is powered by AI, whether you like it or not. This is what, unfortunately, AI systems are built for, to sell you more. So there is a lot to unpack in here. So Jason, I'm more than happy to perhaps collect some questions from the teachers and educators that you have. More than happy to take those questions and almost have like a separate conversation with you about this, because this is quite concerning and it's not getting better. In 20, 25 years, I hope we will be using more ethically sourced or better built systems. Yeah. But right now, my alarm bells ring all the time every time I see stories come out. I'll be in Amsterdam this week talking about these very issues, various ethical issues and considerations that we are concerned about in the industry, let alone education sectors. So I'm not that optimistic. There is a lot of opportunities, but there are also a lot of risks. Probably at the moment, there are more risks, I would say.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I love the work that you're doing. And I hope that continues. And I hope that we can collaborate on doing some of that work here as well, in Canada in particular. And certainly I know my colleagues in the US would be very interested. So with that, Elena, my final question is always, do you have a book, podcast, video, movie, music album that you'd recommend to the audience? It doesn't have to be one of each, but you pick something that you think is the most interesting thing that you're into right now.
Oh my goodness, the most interesting thing I'm into. Well, when I have time, I read books, but I'm trying to think whether there was anything recently that I read that really. A Netflix film called Coded Bias is a really cool one. I would love to recommend to watch to everyone. It's the work. Yeah, I thought I wouldn't say anything about AI in my recommendations, but actually this is the one thing I do recommend. And her TED Talk, her name is Buolamwini. I personally think everyone should be following this incredible work that she's doing with algorithmic justice societies. So if you're into fairness and justice, and if you are seeing what I am seeing in the world, where everything is commercialized, where we're living in the world where you can't even distinguish between fake and real, definitely keep an eye on her work. She's incredible. There is a lot of impact in that work that I see. So the TED Talk is also Joe Buolamwini's TED Talk is very well known. It's on facial recognition systems. And in America and Canada and in the UK, there is a lot right now that's happening within the facial recognition systems that we need to be aware of, and we need to have our governments accountable, hold them accountable. And Joe Buolamwini is obviously representing that civil society group, the ethicists like myself, who really want AI to be used for something better than surveillance or facial recognition of, the systems that are currently not even recognizing women or people of color. So they are incredibly biased. And so there is so much more work. But she's also putting in a lot of work when it comes to AI and criminal systems, AI and hiring. So her work is super, super important. She's just recently written a book called Unmasking AI, which is something I recommend you read. The film on Netflix is called Coded Bias. So definitely search her up. And I would always somehow bring her into my hackathons, either as a recommended reading, or I would start one of my hackathon days with a TED Talk, 20 minutes, to just wake you up. It's an amazing talk. So highly recommend it. It's probably my second favorite talk. The first one is always Ken Robinson's talk. This is kind of what inspired me to do the work that I'm doing. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And this is probably the second most favorite talk that I have. So there you go.
Well, Elena Sinel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jason.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bukhara. Until next time.